Picture this. You're walking through a bustling holiday market on a cold December morning. Children are laughing, vendors are selling handmade crafts, and Christmas music fills the air. Then you see him, sitting in an ornate chair outside a department store, wearing a full Santa suit, laughing with children as they climb onto his lap to share their Christmas wishes. But this isn't just any Santa. This is your husband, the man who vanished from your home 12 years ago on Christmas morning, the man you reported missing to police, the man you mourned, the man whose disappearance shattered your family and left your 6-year-old daughter asking questions you could never answer. And now here he is, 3,000 miles from where he disappeared, living, breathing, laughing that same laugh you'd know anywhere. This is exactly what happened to Rebecca Hartwell on a Saturday morning in Portland, Oregon, in December 2024. 12 years after her husband James walked out of their Connecticut home in the early hours of Christmas Day, 2012, and never came back. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. He left behind his wallet, his phone, his keys, his car, his entire life. He left behind a wife who loved him and a little girl who worshipped him. He stepped out into a snowstorm and vanished without a trace. For 12 years, Rebecca lived with the questions. For 12 years, she wondered if he was alive or dead, if he'd been taken or if he'd chosen to leave. For 12 years, she searched faces in crowds, jumped at phone calls, and carried the weight of not knowing. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. Before we get into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our investigations into cases that defy explanation. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this one to the end. To understand why James Hartwell's disappearance became one of the most baffling missing person cases in Connecticut history, you first need to understand who he was. Because this wasn't a man running from problems. This was a man who had built exactly the kind of life most people dream about. James and Rebecca Hartwell lived in Millbrook, Connecticut, a quiet town where neighbors still knew each other's names and kids played outside until streetlights came on. Their modest 2-story home wasn't fancy, but it was filled with the kind of warmth that no amount of money can buy. Family photos lined the stairwell. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. The kitchen always smelled like coffee in the morning, and whatever Rebecca was cooking for dinner. They'd been married for 8 years by 2012, and by all accounts, they were still genuinely in love. Not the Hollywood version where everything is perfect, but the real kind where you choose each other every single day. Rebecca taught 4th grade at the local elementary school, pouring her heart into her students. James worked as an architect at a mid-sized firm downtown, designing commercial buildings and the occasional residential project. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. James was the kind of man who made fatherhood look easy. Every Saturday morning, he coached his daughter Emma's soccer team, cheering louder than any other parent on the sideline. Sunday mornings meant chocolate chip pancakes, a tradition Emma looked forward to all week. He never missed a school play, always sitting in the front row with flowers for his little girl. When Emma struggled with math homework, James would sit at the kitchen table with her for hours, turning fractions into a game until she finally understood. Rebecca used to joke with her friends that she'd somehow married the last truly decent man on earth. And honestly, her friends agreed. James was a neighbor who showed up with his snowblower when a storm hit, clearing driveways up and down the street without being asked. He volunteered at the local food bank twice a month. He still brought Rebecca flowers for no particular reason, just because he saw them and thought of her. He remembered their anniversary every year, remembered to call his mother-in-law on her birthday, remembered the little things that most people forget. Their friends were envious of what James and Rebecca had built together. At dinner parties, people would watch them finish each other's sentences and share inside jokes, and you could see the longing in other couples' eyes. This was the real deal. This was what everyone wanted. Emma adored her father. At 6 years old, she thought he hung the moon. She'd wait by the window every evening for his car to pull into the driveway, then race to the door to greet him. They had their own special handshake. He let her stand on his feet while they danced in the living room. When she had nightmares, it was always Dad she called for first. This is what makes James Hartwell's disappearance so deeply unsettling. He had everything: a wife who loved him, a daughter who needed him, a stable job, good friends, a home, a life. There was no reason to run, no reason to vanish, no reason to throw it all away. And yet, on Christmas morning 2012, that's exactly what he did. December 24th, 2012 started like every Christmas Eve the Hartwells had celebrated since Emma was born. It was a Tuesday, and Rebecca had taken a day off from school while James left work early. They spent the afternoon baking cookies with Emma, the kitchen counter covered in flour and sprinkles, Christmas music playing from the radio on the windowsill. Around 4 in the afternoon, they began getting ready for the candlelight service at their church. It was a tradition they never missed. Emma wore her favorite red velvet dress, the one with the white collar that made her look like a little doll. James put on the navy suit Rebecca had bought him for their anniversary. Rebecca remembers thinking how handsome he looked, how lucky she was. The service was beautiful. The church was packed with families, everyone singing carols by candlelight. Emma sat between her parents, swinging her legs and trying to stay still. James held Rebecca's hand throughout the service, his thumb absently tracing circles on her palm the way he always did. It was such a small gesture, one she'd experienced 1,000 times before. She had no idea it would be the last. After church, they drove home through streets decorated with lights, Emma chattering excitedly about Santa and reindeer from the back seat. At home, they changed into comfortable clothes and settled in for their annual Christmas movie marathon. Rebecca made hot cocoa from scratch, the real kind with melted chocolate and cream, topped with marshmallows. They watched Elf first, then the Polar Express, all three of them piled together on the couch under blankets. Around 8:30, they took Emma upstairs for bed. She was vibrating with excitement, asking question after question. How does Santa get in if we don't have a chimney? Will the reindeer be able to find our house? What if I'm still awake when he comes? James sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair and answering each question with patience and imagination. He told her Santa had special magic that worked on all houses, with or without chimneys. He promised the reindeer knew exactly where to find her. He told her to close her eyes and think happy thoughts. "I love you, Pumpkin," he said, kissing her forehead. Those were the last words he ever spoke to his daughter. After Emma finally fell asleep, James and Rebecca went out to the garage. The bicycle they'd ordered for Emma was still in its box, and assembly was required. Rebecca still remembers laughing quietly with James as they struggled with the instructions, trying to figure out which bolt went where. They worked well together, the way couples do after years of marriage. He'd hold pieces in place while she tightened screws. She'd read instructions while he sorted parts. It took them almost 2 hours. When they finally finished, they stood back and admired their work, both proud of what they'd accomplished. The bike was purple with streamers on the handlebars and a basket on the front. Emma was going to lose her mind when she saw it. They went back inside around midnight. Together, they filled stockings with candy and small gifts. They ate the cookies Emma had left out for Santa, drank the milk, and left a thank you note in Emma's carefully practiced handwriting that James had helped her write earlier that day. They arranged presents under the tree, making sure Emma's new bike had pride of place. By 2 in the morning, they were exhausted. Instead of going upstairs to bed, they collapsed on the couch, the tree light still glowing softly in the darkness. Rebecca's head rested on James's shoulder. His arm was around her. They were asleep within minutes. It was perfect. It was ordinary. It was the last moment of the life they'd built together. When Rebecca woke a few hours later, James was gone, and he would never come back to explain why. Rebecca's eyes opened just after 6 in the morning on Christmas Day. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The second thing she noticed was the cold. She reached for James, expecting to feel the warmth of his body beside her on the couch where they'd fallen asleep hours earlier. Her hand found only empty cushions, already gone cold to the touch. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, trying to remember where she was. The Christmas tree lights had been turned off. The house was darker than it should have been. "James?" she called out softly, not wanting to wake Emma yet. No answer. Rebecca stood, wrapping the throw blanket around her shoulders. Maybe he'd gone upstairs to bed. Maybe he was in the bathroom. Maybe he was already in the kitchen making coffee, trying to get a head start on Christmas morning preparations. She walked toward the kitchen, her bare feet padding across the hardwood floor. That's when she felt it, a draft of frigid air cutting through the house. The back door was open, not wide open, but ajar, swinging slightly on its hinges. Snow had blown inside, creating a small drift on the mat just inside the doorway. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She rushed to the door and looked outside. James's winter coat was gone from the hook. His boots were missing from the rack, but his car sat in the driveway, covered in a thick blanket of fresh snow that had fallen overnight. No one had driven it anywhere. No one had even brushed it off. Rebecca stepped out onto the back porch, the cold biting through her thin pajamas. She looked down at the snow-covered yard, and her heart started hammering against her ribs. There was a single set of footprints leading from the back door toward the street. Just one set, already being filled in by the continuing snowfall, but still visible enough to follow. They led to the sidewalk, then disappeared as the snow accumulated and obscured them completely. James had walked out of their house in the middle of the night and simply vanished into a snowstorm. Rebecca stood there, staring at those disappearing footprints, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It had to be a mistake. Maybe he'd gone to get something from his car. Maybe he'd seen something outside and gone to investigate. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation. She went back inside and grabbed her phone. 7 missed calls to James's cell went straight to voicemail. She texted him. No response. She called again, and this time she heard it. The faint buzzing sound coming from the living room. His phone was on the coffee table, right where he left it the night before. That's when the panic really set in. Rebecca ran upstairs and checked their bedroom. Empty. She checked the bathroom. Empty. She checked Emma's room, and there was her daughter, still sound asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. By 7 o'clock, Emma was awake and racing downstairs, squealing about Santa and presents. Rebecca tried to keep her voice steady, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for her daughter's sake. Yes, sweetheart, Santa came. Yes, look at your beautiful new bike. Yes, we can open presents in just a minute. But inside, she was screaming. She called James's brother first, around 7:30. No, he hadn't heard from James. Was everything okay? She didn't know how to answer that question. She called James's parents. Nothing. She called his best friend from work. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. By 8 o'clock, Rebecca was tearing through the house looking for clues. James's wallet was on the dresser upstairs. His keys were in the bowl by the front door. His laptop sat closed on his desk in the home office. Everything he would need to function in the world was still here. Everything except James himself. At 9 o'clock on Christmas morning, while Emma played with her new toys in the living room, Rebecca called the police. Her voice shook as she spoke the words she never imagined she'd have to say. I need to report a missing person. My husband. He was here last night, and this morning he's gone. The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Had they argued? Was he having any personal problems? Could he have left voluntarily? Rebecca looked at the Christmas tree, at the bike they'd assembled together just hours ago, at the life they'd built, and she didn't have answers. She only had questions. What would you do if you woke up on Christmas morning and the person you loved most had simply walked out the door and disappeared? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. 2 patrol officers arrived at the Hartwell home within 20 minutes of Rebecca's call. They took down the basic information, asked preliminary questions, and radioed for a detective. By 10 o'clock on Christmas morning, Detective Frank Morrison was standing in Rebecca's living room, notebook in hand, while Emma opened presents in the next room, blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. Detective Morrison was a 20-year veteran of the Millbrook Police Department, and he'd seen his share of missing person cases. Most resolved themselves within 48 hours. A husband who'd gone on a bender. A wife who'd left after a fight. Teenagers running away from home. But something about this case struck him as different from the start. Walk me through last night, Morrison said, settling into the armchair across from Rebecca. She told him Everything. The church service, the movie marathon, tucking Emma into bed, assembling the bike in the garage, falling asleep on the couch around 2 a.m, waking to find James gone, the back door open, footprints in the snow. Morrison took notes, his expression neutral. And your husband, he was acting normal last night? Nothing seemed off. Nothing, Rebecca insisted. Everything was perfect. He was happy. We were happy. Any arguments recently? Money problems? Stress at work? No, none of that. James loved his job. We were doing fine financially. We never fought about anything serious. Morrison nodded slowly, but Rebecca could see the skepticism in his eyes. She'd seen enough crime shows to know what he was thinking. The spouse is always the first suspect. Statistically, when someone goes missing, the person closest to them usually knows why. Mrs. Hartwell, I have to ask, was there any chance your husband was seeing someone else? Or that you were having an affair? The question hit her like a slap. Absolutely not. James would never. I would never. But she could tell Morrison wasn't entirely convinced. Over the next few hours, the police conducted a thorough search of the Hartwell home and property. They found James's wallet on the bedroom dresser, containing his driver's license, credit cards, and about $80 in cash. His car keys sat in the bowl by the front door where he always left them. His cell phone was on the coffee table. His laptop was password protected but showed nothing suspicious when Rebecca unlocked it for them. What James had taken amounted to almost nothing. The clothes he'd been wearing, jeans, a flannel shirt, his winter coat, and boots. That was it. No money, no identification, no way to function in modern society. People don't just vanish into thin air, Morrison told Rebecca as his team finished processing the scene. There's always a reason. We'll find it. But as days turned into weeks, that reason remained frustratingly out of reach. The police interviewed everyone who knew James. His colleagues at the architecture firm described him as reliable and well-liked. His brother said they'd just had dinner together 3 days before Christmas. James seemed fine, excited about the holiday. His parents were devastated and completely bewildered. His friends all said the same thing. This wasn't like James at all. On December 27th, the story hit the local news. Local architect vanishes on Christmas morning. Read the headline in the Millbrook Register. James's photo, a professional headshot from his company website, appeared on television and in newspapers. The tip line lit up immediately. Someone thought they saw James at a gas station in New Hampshire. That lead went nowhere. Another caller reported seeing a man matching his description at a bus station in Boston. Police followed up. It wasn't him. A woman called claiming James had stayed at her bed and breakfast in Vermont. When shown his photo, she admitted she wasn't sure. Every tip was investigated. Every lead was chased down. None of them panned out. Meanwhile, forensic accountant examined James's financial records. His bank account showed regular deposits from his paycheck and routine expenses, mortgage payments, grocery shopping, gas for the car. Nothing unusual. No large withdrawals. No suspicious transfers. His credit cards hadn't been used since December 23rd, when he bought wrapping paper at the drugstore. Investigators looked for signs of a secret life, a second cell phone, hidden email accounts, dating profiles, gambling debts, drug use. They found nothing. James Hartwell appeared to be exactly who everyone said he was, a devoted husband, loving father, and stand-up guy with no skeletons in his closet. Rebecca was questioned repeatedly, each interview more intense than the last. They asked about her marriage from every angle. They asked about life insurance policies. Yes, they each had one, standard coverage through their employers. They asked if she'd ever suspected James of anything. They asked if she'd ever thought about leaving him. They polygraphed her twice. Both times she passed. As weeks turned into months, Detective Morrison became personally invested in the case. He'd go home at night and think about James Hartwell, trying to piece together what could have driven a man to abandon his family on Christmas morning. He reviewed the evidence over and over, looking for something he'd missed. But there was nothing to find. James's credit cards were never used again. His bank account sat untouched. His car remained in the driveway, covered in snow, then rain, then leaves, marking the passage of time. His phone went dead after a few days and was never turned back on. It was as if James Hartwell had stepped out his back door and ceased to exist. By the time the case went cold in early 2014, Detective Morrison had exhausted every avenue of investigation. He'd chased down over 200 tips, interviewed more than 50 people, and spent countless hours trying to solve the mystery. But James Hartwell was gone, and no one could explain why. As the investigation dragged on with no breakthrough, Detective Morrison and his team began exploring every possible theory that could explain James Hartwell's disappearance. Each one seemed plausible at first. Each one eventually fell apart under scrutiny. Theory 1. Amnesia or medical emergency. The most charitable explanation was that James had suffered some kind of medical episode. A stroke, a seizure, a sudden onset of amnesia that caused him to wander away confused and disoriented. Maybe he'd hit his head somehow. Maybe he was out there somewhere, unable to remember who he was or where he came from. But this theory had problems. James had no history of medical issues, no neurological conditions, no head injuries in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. And if he'd collapsed somewhere nearby, search teams would have found him. They'd scoured the woods around Millbrook, checked local hospitals and homeless shelters, distributed his photo to emergency rooms throughout New England. Nothing. Theory 2. Foul play. Perhaps James had been abducted. Maybe he'd interrupted a burglary when he stepped outside. Maybe he'd witnessed something he shouldn't have, and someone had silenced him. Maybe he'd gotten into a car accident on that snowy road, and someone had taken his body. But again, the evidence didn't support it. There were no signs of struggle at the house. No blood. No indication that anyone else had been there. The single set of footprints in the snow belonged to James alone. His body was never found, despite extensive searches. And there was no ransom demand, no explanation, no reason anyone would want to harm him. Theory 3. Voluntary disappearance. This was the theory that haunted Rebecca most. That James had chosen to leave. That he'd planned it, waited until Christmas Eve when she'd be least suspicious, then walked away from his life by choice. But why? James had no secret debts, no hidden addictions, no second family stashed away somewhere. He wasn't being blackmailed. He wasn't running from the law. Investigators found no evidence of planning, no withdrawn cash, no new identity documents, no trail of preparation. And most damning of all, he'd left without taking anything he'd need to start over. No money, no ID, not even his phone. What kind of voluntary disappearance involves leaving with nothing? The frustrating truth was that no theory fully explained the evidence. James had left too deliberately to be suffering from amnesia. He'd put on his coat and boots, but he'd left too unprepared to have planned a voluntary disappearance. And if someone had taken him, they'd done it without leaving a single trace of their presence. As months passed with no answers, the community of Millbrook began to fill the silence with speculation. Some people whispered that Rebecca must have been involved somehow, despite passing 2 polygraph tests. Others suggested James had a secret life no one knew about. Maybe he was gay, maybe he was in witness protection, maybe he was a spy. The most hurtful rumors suggested that James had simply grown tired of his family and started over somewhere new, that he was living it up in another state or country while Rebecca and Emma suffered. These whispers followed Rebecca everywhere, at the grocery store, at parent-teacher conferences, at church. By January 2014, just over a year after James vanished, the case officially went cold. There were no new leads to pursue, no fresh evidence to examine. Detective Morrison kept the file on his desk, refused to box it up and send it to storage, but there was nowhere left to look. James Hartwell had become a ghost, a mystery without a solution, a question without an answer, and Rebecca was left to somehow build a life in the wreckage of unanswered questions. If you're as invested in finding out what really happened to James as we are, hit that like button and stick with us, because the story is far from over. There's a special kind of grief that comes with ambiguous loss. When someone dies, you mourn them, you hold a funeral, you bury them, you move through the stages of grief, and eventually, with time, you begin to heal. But when someone vanishes without explanation, You're trapped in a permanent state of not knowing. You can't mourn because they might still be alive. You can't move on because there's no closure. You exist in a hellish limbo where hope and despair wage war inside you every single day. This became Rebecca Hartwell's reality. The hardest part was explaining it to Emma. How do you tell a 6-year-old that daddy isn't coming home? In those first few weeks, Emma kept asking when he'd be back. She'd sit by the window watching for his car. She'd set a place for him at dinner. She'd save drawings to show him when he came home from wherever he'd gone. Rebecca tried to find the right words. Daddy had to go away. Sweetheart, we don't know where he is right now, but the police are looking for him. It was a truth, but it was also completely inadequate. Emma would nod, seem to understand, and then an hour later ask when Daddy was coming to watch your soccer game. The house became a shrine to a man who might or might not still exist somewhere in the world. Rebecca couldn't bring herself to pack away his things. His clothes still hung in the closet. The navy suit from Christmas Eve service, his collection of flannel shirts, the ratty college sweatshirt he refused to throw away. She kept them there for 3 years, opened the closet door sometimes just to smell them, to remember what it felt like when he was real and present and hers. His toothbrush stayed by the bathroom sink for 2 years. That bright blue electric toothbrush he bought because his dentist recommended it. Rebecca would look at it every morning while brushing her own teeth, and the sight of it would crack her heart open all over again. The wedding ring was its own journey. James had left on his nightstand that night, placed there carefully sometime between falling asleep on the couch and walking out the back door. Rebecca found it Christmas morning, sitting next to his watch and the book he'd been reading. She wore her own ring for 7 years, unable to take it off. To remove it felt like admitting he was never coming back, like giving up on him completely. When she finally moved it to her right hand in 2019, she cried for 3 days straight. She never filed for divorce. Couldn't bring herself to do it. The lawyer she consulted told her she could James declared legally dead after 7 years, which would allow her to settle his estate, collect life insurance, move on officially. Rebecca refused. I don't have a body, she told the lawyer. I don't have proof. I can't declare someone dead when I don't know if they're alive or not. Emma's relationship with her father's memory evolved as she grew up. In elementary school, she created elaborate fantasies about where he might be. Maybe he was a secret agent on a classified mission. Maybe he'd been kidnapped by people who needed an architect to build something important. Maybe he had amnesia and was wandering around trying to remember his way home. These stories help her cope with the abandonment she didn't yet fully understand. By middle school, the fantasies had faded. Emma stopped talking about her father altogether. She took down his photo from her nightstand. When friends asked about her family, she'd say, "It's just me and my mom." High school brought anger, the raw, burning kind that comes when a child finally comprehends what they've lost. Emma would lash out at Rebecca sometimes, screaming questions that had no answers. How could he just leave us? Didn't he love us? Didn't we matter to him? Rebecca had no good answers. She wondered the same things herself late at night. Rebecca tried everything to cope. She went to therapy for 2 years, sitting on an uncomfortable couch every Tuesday evening, trying to process trauma that had no resolution. She joined a support group for families of missing persons, meeting once a month with other people trapped in the same awful limbo. They understood in a way no one else could. She tried dating half-heartedly when Emma was in middle school. A few coffee dates, one dinner that went nowhere. But how do you explain to someone new that you're technically still married? That part of you is still waiting for a man who disappeared over a decade ago? That you can't fully give yourself to anyone new because you're haunted by someone who might still be out there? The men were understanding at first, but eventually they all left. They wanted someone who could commit fully, someone who wasn't carrying the weight of an unsolved mystery. Rebecca couldn't blame them. She learned to function in this strange half-life. She taught her students, attended Emma's school events, paid the bills, maintained the house. From the outside, she looked like she'd moved on. But inside, she was still that woman on Christmas morning, staring at footprints disappearing into the snow, waiting for answers that never came. The worst part was a constant vigilance. Every time the phone rang, her heart would race. Every time she saw a man with James's build or coloring, she'd do a double take. Every Christmas morning for 12 years, she'd wake up with that same sick feeling in her stomach, reliving the moment she realized he was gone. Rebecca Hartwell learned to live with a ghost. She had no other choice. By December 2024, Rebecca Hartwell had mastered the art of existing. Not living. There was a difference. Living meant embracing joy fully, taking risks, opening yourself to possibility. Existing meant going through the motions well enough that people stopped asking if you were okay. Emma was 20 now, home from college for winter break. She was studying psychology at the University of Connecticut, and Rebecca sometimes wondered if her daughter's choice of major was an attempt to understand what had happened to her family, to make sense of the senseless. Emma never said as much, but Rebecca knew her daughter well enough to read between the lines. Their lives looked different now. The Christmas traditions that had once defined them were too painful to maintain, so they'd built new ones. Every Christmas Eve, they volunteered at the homeless shelter in Hartford, serving meals and sorting donations. It felt meaningful in a way that sitting around their own tree never could anymore. Christmas Day was spent with Rebecca's sister's family. Loud, chaotic gatherings full of cousins and noise that helped drown out the memories. The house in Millbrook was paid off now. Rebecca had kept working, kept teaching, kept putting one foot in front of the other. She had friends, hobbies, a book club she attended monthly. From the outside, she looked like someone who'd healed. But healing implied an ending, and Rebecca's story had no ending, just an ellipsis that stretched on forever. In 2018, 6 years after James vanished, Rebecca received a card in the mail. It was from Detective Morrison. He was retiring after 30 years with the Millbrook Police Department. Inside, written in careful handwriting, was a message that brought tears to her eyes. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry I couldn't give you the answers you deserved. Your husband's case has haunted me throughout my career. I never stopped thinking about it, never stopped hoping for a breakthrough. I wish I could have done more. Take care of yourself and that beautiful daughter. Frank Morrison. Rebecca kept that card in the drawer of her nightstand, right next to James's wedding ring. She'd taken from his nightstand years ago, unable to leave it sitting there forever. Sometimes, on particularly hard days, she'd open the drawer and look at these artifacts of her old life. The ring he deliberately removed before walking out. The detective's apology for failing to solve the mystery. They were proof that it had all been real, that she hadn't imagined the life they'd built together. The Portland trip hadn't been her idea. Emma had suggested it in early December, pitching it as a pre-holiday adventure. Mom, you need to do something for yourself. When's the last time you went somewhere just for fun? We could explore a new city, check out Powell's books. You love bookstores. Just a quick weekend before everything gets crazy with the holidays. Rebecca had been reluctant. She didn't like traveling, didn't like being far from home. What if something happened? What if there was news? But that was ridiculous, and she knew it. There hadn't been news in 12 years. There wasn't going to be news. Mom, you need to live, Emma had said, and there was something in her daughter's voice, frustration mixed with love. That made Rebecca agree. Really live, not just exist. So they booked flights to Portland, Oregon for the weekend before Christmas. A mother-daughter trip. Something to look forward to. Something to prove that they were more than just survivors of a tragedy, that they could still find joy in the world. Rebecca had no way of knowing that this trip would change everything. That in a crowded square in a city 3,000 miles from home, the past 12 years of questions would collide with an impossible present. She packed her suitcase, kissed a framed photo of her and James that still sat on her dresser, and flew across the country, believing she was just taking a vacation. She had no idea she was flying straight toward the answer she'd been searching for. Portland, Oregon in mid-December was everything Emma had promised it would be. The city had a different energy than Connecticut, more laid-back, artistic, quirky in a way that Rebecca found charming. They'd arrived Friday evening and spent Saturday morning exploring. The Portland Saturday market was packed despite the cold weather. Vendors sold handmade jewelry, local art, organic soaps, vintage clothing. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries hung in the air. Emma was in her element, weaving through crowds, stopping to admire handcrafted earrings and screen-printed posters. Rebecca followed, sipping a latte from a local roaster, letting herself enjoy the moment. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she didn't need this. Maybe it was time to stop existing and start living again. "Oh, Mom, there's that vintage shop I read about." Emma pointed across the square. "Want to check it out?" "You go ahead," Rebecca said. "I'll catch up in a minute." Emma disappeared into the crowd, and Rebecca found herself wandering toward the sound of children's laughter. It was coming from the far end of the market, near a large department store with elaborate window displays. She moved closer, curious about what was drawing such a crowd. That's when she saw him. He was sitting in an ornate wooden chair that had been set up on the sidewalk, surrounded by fake snow and Christmas decorations. The Santa suit was professional quality, red velvet with white fur trim. His beard was full and white, slightly crooked on one side. Children lined up with their parents, waiting their turn to sit on Santa's lap and share their Christmas wishes. Rebecca would have walked right past, would have smiled at the scene and kept moving. But then Santa laughed. That laugh, it hit her like a physical blow. Deep and genuine, the kind of laugh that started in the chest and filled a whole room, or, in this case, a whole street corner. She'd heard that laugh 1,000 times, had fallen asleep to that laugh, had mourned the absence of that laugh for 12 years. Her feet stopped moving. Her heart stopped beating. The man tilted his head as he listened to a little boy explain what he wanted for Christmas. That gesture, the slight tilt to the right, the way he leaned in to show he was really listening. James used to do that exact thing with Emma. Rebecca's vision narrowed. The market noise faded to a distant hum. She took a step closer, then another, moving through the crowd like she was underwater. His hands. She could see his hands now as he helped a child climb onto his lap. Those hands, larger than average, with long fingers. There was a scar on his right thumb. She could see it even from 15 feet away. James had gotten that scar in college, cutting vegetables, long before she'd met him. He'd told her the story on their third date, but it was the eyes that destroyed her. When the Santa lifted his head to greet the next child in line, Rebecca saw his face clearly for the first time. The beard hid most of his features, but the eyes were unmistakable, brown with flecks of gold, slight crinkles at the corners from years of smiling, eyes that had looked at her on their wedding day, eyes that had watched Emma take her first steps, eyes that had been the last thing she'd seen before falling asleep on Christmas Eve 2012. She knew those eyes. She'd searched for those eyes in crowds for 12 years, had seen them in dreams and nightmares, had wondered if she'd ever see them again or if they'd been closed forever, somewhere she'd never find them. And now here they were, looking at a child, smiling, alive. "Mom!" Emma's voice came from somewhere behind her, distant and distorted. "Mom, what's wrong?" Rebecca couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world had tilted sideways, and she was falling through 12 years of grief and questions and impossible hope. The man, James, it was James, it had to be James, finished with one child and looked up to wave the next one forward. His gaze swept across the crowd, and then his eyes met hers. Time stopped. Rebecca saw it happen in slow motion, the moment of connection, the flash of recognition that crossed his face. His eyes widened just slightly. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He knew her. He recognized her. And in that recognition, Rebecca saw something that shattered her all over again. Not confusion, not surprise, but something worse. Fear. Or maybe it was sorrow. Or maybe it was both, tangled together in an expression so complex she couldn't begin to interpret it. But whatever it was, it meant one thing. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This wasn't amnesia. This wasn't a man who'd forgotten his old life. This was a man who remembered everything and had chosen not to come home. The moment lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds that contained 12 years of questions, of grief, of waiting, of wondering. 3 seconds where Rebecca's entire understanding of reality cracked open. And then he looked away, just turned his head, Focus on the little girl climbing onto his lap, his Santa smile sliding back into place like a mask. As if Rebecca were just another face in the crowd. As if she were no one. As if that moment of recognition hadn't just happened. As if the last 12 years hadn't happened. Rebecca stood frozen, her daughter's hand gripping her arm, her vision blurring with tears. She didn't remember starting to cry. Around them, the market continued. People shopped. Children laughed. Life went on. But Rebecca's world had just ended for the second time. Because James Hartwell wasn't missing. He wasn't dead. He wasn't suffering from amnesia or being held captive or lost somewhere unable to find his way home. He was here, in Portland, playing Santa, living a life. And he'd looked at his wife, the woman who'd spent 12 years waiting for him, wondering about him, grieving him, and he'd looked away. Rebecca's legs gave out. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like someone had unplugged her from a power source. Emma caught her mother's arm, holding her up. Mom, what's happening? Are you okay? Rebecca couldn't form words. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out except a sound that wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob. Her hand lifted, pointing toward the Santa, shaking so violently she could barely hold it steady. Emma followed her mother's gaze, confused. What? The Santa? Mom, you're scaring me. That's... Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper. That's your father. The words hung in the cold December air between them. Emma's head snapped back toward the man in the Santa suit. What? Mom, no. That's not, you can't. It's him. Rebecca's voice grew stronger, more certain, even as her body trembled. Emma, I know it's him. The scar on his thumb. His eyes. The way he laughs. That's your father. Emma stared at the Santa, her grip tightening on Rebecca's arm. The man was helping another child down from his lap now, waving to the next family in line. He hadn't looked their way again, hadn't acknowledged them, was deliberately not looking at them. We have to. Rebecca started forward, her shock transforming into something else. Anger, desperation, need. She had to talk to him, had to make him look at her, had to hear him explain how this was possible. Mom, wait. Emma pulled her back. Wait. Just think for a second. Think. Rebecca's voice rose. People nearby turned to look. Emma, that's your father. That's James. He's right there. I need to. I know. Emma's own voice was shaking now, her face pale. But Mom, if that really is him, if he's here, if he's been alive this whole time... She stopped, struggling with the enormity of what that meant. What if he runs? What if we approach him and he just disappears again? Rebecca hadn't thought about that. Her mind was a hurricane of emotion, impossible to organize into coherent thought. But Emma was right. If they confronted him publicly, if they made a scene, what would he do? Would he deny it? Would he claim they were mistaken? Would he simply walk away? Could she survive watching him leave her a second time? We need to be smart about this, Emma said, and Rebecca could hear the tremor beneath her daughter's attempt at calm. Emma, who'd been 6 years old the last time she saw her father. Emma, who'd spent her teenage years angry at him. Emma, who was now 20 and staring at the man who'd abandoned her, visible emotions warring across her face. They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching him. He went through the motions of being Santa with practiced ease. Ho, ho, what would you like for Christmas? Little one, have you been good this year? The performance was smooth, comfortable. He'd done this before, maybe many times. How long had he been in Portland? How long had he been playing Santa? How long had he been living this other life, while they suffered through 12 years of not knowing? I'm going to take a photo, Emma said suddenly, pulling out her phone. We need proof, in case he leaves, in case we lose him. She was right. Rebecca watched as her daughter discreetly snapped several photos of the Santa, zooming in on his face, his hands, capturing every angle. Got it, Emma whispered. Now what? Rebecca's mind was beginning to function again, shock giving way to a fierce determination. We wait. We see where he goes when he's done. We follow him. And then... and then we get answers. They moved to a nearby coffee shop with a window view of the Santa setup. Ordered drinks they didn't want. Sat at a table where they could watch without being obvious. Rebecca's hands shook so badly she could barely hold her cup. Emma kept glancing at her phone, at the photos she'd taken, then back out the window. "Mom, I can't." "How is this possible? How could he?" Her voice broke. "Why would he do this to us?" Those were the same questions Rebecca had been asking herself for 12 years. And now, impossibly, the person who could answer them was sitting less than 100 feet away, listening to children's Christmas wishes. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rebecca said, "but we're going to find out." They sat there for 2 hours, drinking cold coffee, watching James, or whoever he become, interact with dozens of families. He never looked their way again, never gave any indication that his world had just been turned upside down the way theirs had. But Rebecca knew what she'd seen in that moment when their eyes met. He remembered her. He knew exactly who she was, which meant everything he'd done, leaving on Christmas morning, staying gone for 12 years, building a new life in Portland. All of it had been a choice. And Rebecca was going to make him explain why. At 4:30 p.m., the Santa shift ended. James, or whoever he was now, stood up, stretched, and began helping store employees dismantle the setup. Rebecca and Emma watched through the coffee shop window, barely breathing. He removed the Santa hat, but kept the rest of the costume on, said goodbye to the staff members who'd been managing the line. Then he walked down the street, carrying a backpack, moving with the same gait Rebecca had watched for 8 years of marriage. They followed at a distance. He walked 6 blocks to a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit, disappeared inside. Rebecca and Emma stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at the window where a light had just turned on. "Now what?" Emma whispered. Rebecca pulled out her phone and called the only person she could think of. Detective Morrison might be retired, but he'd given her his personal number years ago. Told her to call if she ever needed anything. He answered on the 3rd ring. 20 minutes later, Morrison called back. He'd made some calls, pulled some strings, used connections from his 30 years in law enforcement. The man living in that apartment was named David Mitchell. He'd been in Portland for 11 years. He worked part-time as a freelance architectural consultant, mostly small residential projects, and picked up seasonal work every Christmas playing Santa at various locations around the city. David Mitchell had a social security number, a driver's license, a bank account, all of it legitimate, all of it dating back to early 2013, just weeks after James Hartwell vanished from Connecticut. He built a whole new identity, Morrison said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I don't know how he did it, but it's solid, legal, as far as I can tell. This isn't a fake ID situation. This is someone who legally became a different person." "Does he have a family?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely steady. That was the question that terrified her most. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "No, he lives alone. No marriage records. No children registered to that name. He keeps to himself mostly. Neighbors describe him as quiet, friendly but private. So he'd been alone all this time. No new wife, no replacement daughter, just James or David, living a solitary life 3,000 miles from a family he'd abandoned. Somehow that made it worse. The legal implications were staggering. Morrison explained them in careful detail. James Hartwell was legally still married to Rebecca, still had parental rights to Emma, still technically owned half their house, though Rebecca had been paying the mortgage alone for 12 years. He'd committed no crime. Disappearing isn't illegal. Creating a new identity through legal channels, while unusual, wasn't necessarily criminal if done properly. But he abandoned his family, Emma said, her voice shaking with fury. "He left us. Doesn't that mean something?" "In family court, yes," Morrison explained. "But criminally, he's in a gray area. The question is, what do you want to happen here?" Rebecca didn't have an answer. What did she want? Answers, certainly. An explanation for 12 years of suffering. But beyond that, did she want him arrested? Did she want him to come home? Did she want revenge? She didn't know. She only knew that she couldn't walk away without understanding why. The next morning, Rebecca stood outside David Mitchell's apartment door and knocked. She heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. A pause. He was probably looking through the peephole, seeing her standing there. The door opened. James Hartwell, because regardless of what name he used now, that's who he was, stood in the doorway wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. He looked older, tired. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but it was unmistakably him. "Hello, Rebecca," he said quietly. 2 words. The first words he'd spoken to her in 12 years. And with those words, Rebecca knew that whatever explanation he gave, whatever reason he offered for walking out on Christmas morning and never coming back, nothing would ever make sense of what he'd done. But she was going to hear it anyway. What do you think could possibly justify what James did? What explanation could make sense of abandoning your family for 12 years? Share your theories in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss the conclusion of this story. What James told Rebecca that morning in Portland remains between them. Some stories are too personal, too painful to share with the world. What we do know is that Rebecca and Emma flew back to Connecticut 2 days later, forever changed by what they'd learned. The Hartwell case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. We want to believe that people who have everything, love, family, stability, wouldn't throw it away. We want to believe that disappearances happen because of tragedy, not choice. We want to believe that the people we love wouldn't willingly walk away from us. But sometimes they do. This case reveals a devastating impact that one person's choices can have on the lives they leave behind. Rebecca spent 12 years in limbo, unable to grieve properly, unable to move forward, trapped in a prison of unanswered questions. Emma grew up a father-shaped hole in her life, her childhood defined by absence and abandonment. Their trauma wasn't caused by death or accident or forces beyond anyone's control. It was caused by one man's decision to walk out a door and never come back. There's a question that haunts every case like this. Is it better to know the truth or to live with the hope that comes from not knowing? For 12 years, Rebecca could tell herself that James might have been taken against his will, that he might have suffered an accident, that circumstances beyond his control kept him from coming home. Those possibilities, however painful, allowed for the belief that he'd loved them, that he'd wanted to stay. The truth took that comfort away. The truth revealed that James had been alive and well, living under a new name, building a new life while his wife and daughter suffered. The truth provided answers, but those answers came at a cost that can never be repaid. As of this recording, James Hartwell still lives in Portland under the name David Mitchell. Rebecca has initiated legal proceedings, though what outcome she's seeking remains private. Emma is back at school, processing a revelation that overturned everything she thought she knew about her childhood. The Hartwell case isn't just about one man's disappearance. It's about the ripple effects of abandonment, the weight of secrets, and the price of starting over. It's about how someone can be physically present in the world while being completely absent from the lives of people who need them most. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't the ones that remain unsolved. Sometimes the most haunting mysteries are the ones where we finally get answers and wish we hadn't. Some questions, once answered, can never be unasked. Some truths, once known, can never be unknown. Rebecca Hartwell waited 12 years for the truth. Now she has to find a way to live with it. Thank you for watching this investigation. If you found this case as compelling as we did, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories that will keep you up at night. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.